All right, the select verse from today's Stand on the Word, our 2-year journey through the Bible, comes from Genesis chapter 26, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Isaac went down to Gerar. Abimelech, king of the Philistines, was there, and Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy." That's in Genesis chapter 26, verses 1, 13, and 14. You see, God's ability to provide for his children and even prosper them has nothing to do with the political or economic conditions surrounding them. We're just to trust the Lord. I invite you to join us in our 2-year journey through the Bible. Go to frc.org/Bible to find out how. All right, following the president's show of support today for his efforts, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is expected to force votes as soon as tomorrow on 2 pieces of legislation that Democrats are trying to use to take over elections: the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Earlier today, Senator Schumer again spoke of the alleged threats to democracy and suggested that any opposition to his efforts is support for the big lie.
So we need to pass these bills so our democracy can long endure after this present danger. To continue blocking these efforts is to offer an implicit endorsement of Donald Trump's big lie, which unfortunately is alive and well in 2022.
With me now to talk about what's ahead in the United States Senate and Senator Schumer's self-imposed January 17th deadline is Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, the ranking member on the Senate Rules Committee. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Tony, great to be with you. I think we haven't had a chance to visit yet this year, so Happy New Year, and it's good to start out this week of this year with you.
Well, thank you, Senator. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm sure you probably caught pieces of the president's speech down in Atlanta, where just moments ago he endorsed the overturning of the rules in the Senate so that they can push forward the federal takeover of elections. So a couple of questions here for you, Senator. Let's start here with, what are we talking about with the rule change? What is this really all about?
Well, I think it is all about just taking advantage of a temporary moment where Democrats control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House. And in all cases, they've tried to act like this is somehow a mandate, and they have a mandate to move forward with dramatic changes in the country. Clearly, there's no mandate. But Chuck Schumer, who you said described, we heard him say this is a threat to democracy, was saying just a couple of years ago it was a threat to democracy if you did the other thing. The one thing that Republicans on this topic have been incredibly consistent on is appreciating the fact that the 60-vote threshold in the Senate stops the Senate from becoming the House. It stops the Congress from passing one set of legislation that appears to be popular at a moment, like the House often does, and then 2 years later coming back and repealing that legislation, which didn't turn out to be so popular after all. It's really what makes the Senate unique among almost all legislative bodies, the requirement that the country really has to feel pretty strongly about something to change course in a dramatic or immediate way. They may have to repeat themselves in a couple of elections, and usually that doesn't happen, Tony. On most issues that have a momentary burst of energy, by the time you get to the next election 2 years later, people have thought more about it, and they've thought, well, maybe that would be going too far. And that's one of the reasons we've been able to maintain the constitutional protections we've had, is the uniqueness of the Senate. And you're going to hear a lot this week, as we heard at a press conference that I put together today, of Republican members talking about what Democrats were saying 4 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and what they're saying today. And they want, if they can change the rules to where they could do anything by 51 votes, they could make Washington, D.C. a state with 51 votes, and they could do that between now and the 2022 election. They might make Puerto Rico a state. They certainly could do the election takeover that they're pushing forward this week. And all that really is a collection of everything Democrats have wanted to do for at least a decade that they think would give them an advantage in the election process. It's an effort on their part to do whatever they can right now to be sure they maximize the likelihood they'd stay in power. And I think there'll be at least a couple of Democrats who won't agree with that, and that means that it won't happen.
This is certainly short-sighted, and it is designed to capture the moment for the benefit of the left. But I don't want to get into a lecture. I know you're former college president. I've been a adjunct professor in government. And there's such a thing as equilibrium, and we have to understand that the Senate has played a key role in the history of this country, as you said, where there are things that will capture the attention of the public for a moment. It'll rush through the House, even rush through the executive branch, but it has kind of been the anchor of our republic has been in the Senate. Now, there are important issues that have come before the Senate that I can recall that it took maybe a decade, but consensus was finally built in the Senate, and those things were passed. But the public was brought along. And I just think it's very short-sighted in what the Democrats are trying to do here. And I do want to underscore a point you said just a moment ago at the beginning of this. Republicans have remained consistent. Even when you were in the majority and had the ability to change the rules to do what the Democrats were doing, you said no then, and you're saying no today. But the Democrats—
That was even with President Trump's sense of this, where I think at the news conference we had today, somebody said the president on 30 different occasions in the 2 years that we controlled the House and Senate called on the Senate to change the rules so we could do whatever we could do with that unique moment. But it would have the equilibrium of the country matters, and people sticking with a major change in a way that assures that this is really what we want to do matters. And Republicans have been consistent about that. Democrats can say as long as they want to, well, if you were in charge, you'd make the change. The truth is, we just proved we were in charge and are really committed to this important constitutional principle that creates not just balance of power in the government, but balance of power between the House and the Senate in a helpful way, just because the Senate functions differently. And you're also going to hear this week on the election issues themselves. You're going to talk to Attorney General Paxton about that in a minute. That there's a huge rollback in voting rights. And I've looked at this very carefully. I was an election official for 20 years, including being the Secretary of State, the chief election official of our state. And what happened in state after state was the legislature leaned forward in response to the pandemic, as frankly you would want them to in a unique moment like that, opened some doors that hadn't been opened before, had that election, had participation in that election, and then when the pandemic was over, looked at the things they had done, and in all cases decided to keep some of them that they were appropriate, whether there was a pandemic or not, and to eliminate others that were only appropriate when you had that unique circumstance. So I think no matter what the Democrats say, virtually every state has more voting opportunity in 2021 than they had in 2018. So you go back to their 18 laws, the states didn't go back to where they were in 2018. They said, we tried some things. Some of them we think were good enough to be permanent. Some of them you should only do in a pandemic moment. And frankly, that's exactly how you should want the process to work, to step forward when there's a unique challenge and then reevaluate when that challenge passes, if anything you did in that step forward was something you want to maintain. And all of these states, including Texas, did that.
That's the way the system's supposed to work. That's our federalist system. This would preempt the federalist system because it has a one-size-fits-all for the entire nation. But Senator Blunt
doesn't fit anybody very well,
Exactly. It's like, I won't go there. But let's talk about that's not the end of this. They're talking about voting rights, but there's a whole host of issues. If they're not going to do just a carve out for election laws. Once they pass this threshold, every left-leaning group, special interest group, is going to demand a vote on their issue.
That's right. And, I think Joe Manchin in his comments last week understood this when he said, once you start carving up the turkey, before you know it, you've eaten the whole turkey. Not sure I'd say it exactly that way, but you can't, a carve out is just not possible in my view. Once you have made an exception, then the next thing that comes up, people will say, well, if voting rights are important, isn't the environment important? Isn't the next pandemic important? Isn't this important? It would be the beginning of the end of the Senate as a unique institution. It would be more like a parliamentarian government where you've got everything, you just do everything. And I think this whole idea on their part of even pretending they have a mandate is one of the reasons they're in so much trouble with voters right now. The Senate couldn't possibly be closer than it is. They don't even have 51 votes in the Senate. You'd have to bring the vice president in to get 51 votes. The Senate's 50-50. The House Democrats have the closest margin they've had in 170 years, and there is no mandate. And one of the big problems they've got right now is built on that, acting like this is a moment when they should do anything they want to do, whether it's elections or the big spending, reckless spending bill.
Senator, we got to leave it there. We're out of time. Good to talk with you. Folks, stick with us.